Mr. Gautam Bhatia. It is lovely to have you here in Calicut at the KLF. Well, it is a unique combination that you bring to the world of fiction because you sort of fuse law and speculative fiction. Law, as we all know, is very analytic, quite objective, and on the other hand, you have speculative fiction, which is very emotive. And the sentence is a narrative that fuses both of these genres together. Not only that, I guess I would, if I were to slot your narrative into a particular genre, it would be as political science fiction. Would you care to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, science fiction has always been a deeply political genre. From the very beginnings, you normally date science fiction back to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which is obviously a musing on technology, the perils of technology, and the human condition. In the 1950s and 60s, there was a lot of science fiction writing about the exploration of space, the relationship between humans and alien species, and something as contemporary as a nuclear war. So science fiction has always really commented and been engaged with politics. And of late, we have an entire style of writing that engages deeply with society, social organization, and ways of organizing politics, right? So Ursula Le Guin, one of the most famous science fiction writers, was the first one to really explore what anarchism might look like in practice in science fiction. So it's been a history of intersection of science fiction, politics, and of course law being political plays a very important part in that.
Well, in this particular novel, there are characters who live with the consequences of different laws which operate in different regions and different systems. I guess this is quite Foucauldian in nature, and it is not always that you find such intricate references to Foucault in speculative fictional genre. And I'm going to go deeper into this because your novel is filled with intertextuality and hypertextuality. So did Foucault actually influence you into thinking about, how laws change over time, over space, and how punishments, which were quite rigid at one point of time, might have been imposed on the victim's body or an innocent body at another time?
Yeah, I think Foucault is important in two respects. One, of course, is very important work on punishment, because this book is about the idea of crime and punishment and the ways in which punishment is used as disciplining, right? So the idea that that criminal law and sentencing, the sentence, that becomes a tool to discipline society. That's one important insight. And secondly, Foucault's idea of power, right? That power is not just the state coming down on you, but power is exercised through individual relationships in every social pore and social structure. I think that is also something that plays a part.
You have two different spaces here, right? The council and the commune, and you have the anarchist whose memory they're trying to recreate, and you again talk of capital punishment as well. And you say that, it's all about Peruma. I think you should speak about the storyline first before we go into the intricacies of it. Would you care to?
Yeah, so the story of the novel is that there is a city called Peruma, which is divided into two halves. And this division came about 100 years before the storyline, when there was a political assassination of the city's ruler. And that assassination sparked a revolution that then created this division in the city. At the same time, the assassin was sentenced to what in this I call the sentence, which is a death penalty, but it's reversible. So you are sentenced to frozen sleep in cryogenic preservation, but if it's proven later on that you are innocent, you can be brought back to life. So it's a bit like reversible death penalty, right? So if we were able to devise technology which could bring people back to life, would we then have that as a kind of punishment for, certain kinds of very serious crimes, while keeping open the possibility that if you were mistaken, we could always reverse that effect. So the story takes place 100 years after, and there is now some doubt over whether that individual actually was the assassin or not. And then the story's protagonist is basically asked to investigate. And the story takes place over 7 days, the investigation of that historical crime, which of course then leads to opening up the entire history of the city as a whole. So that is, in a sense, the main story of the novel.
And I guess there is another element to it. When you talk about memory, usually in fiction, we just find the intricacies of forgetting and remembering and nostalgia and all that. And on the other hand, you have people like Svetlana Alexievich, who go into a crowd of people years after an event has happened. So we have n number of narratives that deal with memory. I think you have brought in a new slant to it when you talk of the memory of witnesses from a very, very legal aspect. Would you care to elaborate on that dimension?
Yeah, so memory plays different roles in the novel. One, of course, is collective memory. So, for example, in Spain, after Franco died, the dictator died, there was a transition to democracy. And one of the conditions for that was something that they call the law of forgetting, or it's literally in Spanish, pacto olvidado, which means the pact of forgetting. And it basically, I mean, the idea was that we will move on to democracy, but nobody will question what crimes were committed in that period. Because the only way to move on now is to bury the past and to forget the past. In Latin American countries, after civil wars, you often have this idea that the only way to have peace and to move on is to not ask what happened. Right? So we now finished, we'll now move on. And so there is this tension between justice and peace. So in order to have peace and to move on, you need to forget or sacrifice justice for what happened. And so in this novel, when the protagonist is looking at bringing back this individual, she's told that, why do you want to reopen that very bitter history? Let's just forget that. And even if he was wrongfully convicted, it's all now the past. So let's not try and reopen that very bitter past. Let's move on. And then there is a debate over that feeds into the novel's ending. The other way in which memory works is, of course, at an individual level, which is that we all need a kind of origin myth for our societies to just survive and to give meaning to our lives. So we need to know where we came from, how we began. And when someone questions that origin myth, then that leads to social conflict. And we see it, of course, in India right now all the time. But the Albanian writer Ismail Kadare, he's somebody I think who really powerfully explores this idea of how individuals and societies both need the idea or the story of an origin, where they came from, just to give a structure and a meaning to daily life. And whenever someone tries to question that, in this case, someone asks, okay, did this person who is this revered martyr actually do this? That leads to all kinds of reactions and it creates problems. So I think memory plays that double role in the novel.
And that leads me to the next question, which I wanted to ask you. You speak about justice or peace as if one is exclusive of the other. As a writer, you can use your imagination, but this is a question because you are a practicing lawyer as well. What do you think is more important, justice or peace?
This is a really, really good question, and the answer is often just very difficult to really,
Quite contextual.
It's contextual, and I mean, it's interesting that you say this because when the Supreme Court in 2019 issued the judgment in the Babri Masjid Ram Janmabhoomi case, of course, there was a national debate, but there was also an internal debate among lawyers that, because obviously the judgment is reverse engineered, right? It's not really a judgment that is based on, it claims to be based on property law, but actually it's obviously a political judgment that is trying to, do something politically. And that, of course, as a lawyer, we all knew when we read the judgment. And one argument made by lawyers in our internal conversation was that this is the only way you can move on. The Supreme Court actually has done the right thing in closing a festering dispute, and now it's closed it and we can all move on. Whereas some of us believe that actually, this is no way to move on, right? And so I think that question arises in law all the time because every judgment by a court closes a debate, right? And it sanctifies one vision of the truth over the other. And in high-stakes constitutional cases, it's often a historical truth, right? So if you look at Article 370, the Kashmir case, other such cases, what you're arguing in court is not just the law, but also history. You know, what really happened and what the history was. And the court always sanctifies one vision over the other. Right? And so I think in that case, it's really impossible to segregate justice and peace, because to achieve peace, you will have to always make certain assumptions about what justice requires.
And I think that is something that troubles you constantly, because there are many references in this narration to these ideas, because you say, let justice be done though the world burns. One character talks about that. And then you say, between equal right, force will decide. So there is this inherent dilemma, the dichotomy between these two polar opposites, I think.
Yeah, so basically there's a tension between these two views about justice and peace. The protagonist of the novel, her motto is this famous line, let justice be done though the world burn, which is a famous line from our real life. The idea being that all that matters is that the right thing be done. Right? The consequences will follow. That's not for us to predict, to try and anticipate, to deal with. We must do the right thing, right? The morally, ethically right thing. On the other hand, there is the more political view, which is that consequences matter, right? So you cannot separate that from assessment of what is right and wrong. That tension plays the role throughout the whole novel.
And then you talk about this commune. You say the commune was a city without a center, without fixity. And as a literature teacher, I was taken back to Derrida. And I think you are a voracious reader. You know, you read from different genres. Are you actually hinting at the concept of globalization here, where you talk about a commune is a city without a center?
So the commune is inspired broadly by the Paris Commune, which is, of course, the Paris Commune in the 1870s. For 3 months, existed as an experiment to have an equal society before the French forces came and militarily suppressed it. A very fascinating part of history. And the whole idea of the Paris Commune and other such initiatives was that we will not replicate the state, right? So a centralized, top-down structure that imposes law and authority, we will not replicate that. And that, of course, reflects in daily life. So in just how you structure geography, urban spaces, right? So if you don't have a center where power congregates, then that also reflects in the way you have your urban spaces and so on. So it was more engaging with how urban architecture and spaces play a role in political imagination of decentralized governance and administration.
When we were speaking earlier, you told me that Indian science fiction, the imaginary, is stuck somewhere with Asimov, with UFOs and all these things. But I think speculative fiction has moved far beyond that. And in this, your narrative, it's extremely intertextual. You talk about philosophy, the Paris Commune, Rimbaud, Sartre. Who's your implied reader?
Yeah, I think a writer is always trying to bring a public into being, right? So they don't exist until the book is written. And I think that, so the book, of course, has many Easter eggs for Indian readers, references to Indian politics, Indian law, so there are many Easter eggs. But above all, I think it's for readers who are interested in just how law shapes power, and power shapes law as well, in a broadly speculative, imaginary context of the future.
So your voracious reading does bleed into your imagination, imaginative writing as well. When I read the sentence, there are two people I thought of. One was, I thought, this is like reading Christopher Nolan's movie as a novel. And another person I thought of was Martini, Arcady Martini, and her sort of world building. Have these people actually been of any influence?
Yeah, so I do love some of Christopher Nolan's films, and Inception is one of my favorites. And I think that the ambiguity of the ending in Inception inspired this book. I wouldn't reveal, of course, spoilers, but yeah, the way Inception ended and just leaves certain things to the reader to decide was a big inspiration, for sure. Arcady Martin is a very prominent science fiction writer who has written 2 novels which won the Hugo Award, a memory called Empire, a desolation called Peace. And she really weaves in political structures into a world building. That's also a big inspiration for that, yeah.
And this concept of capital punishment, as a lawyer, what do you think about it? Does the state actually need to take a life to sort of implement justice?
So as a lawyer, of course, I am an abolitionist. I believe that we should not have capital punishment. As a writer, I can't take that, that view categorically because the writer's job is not to force an answer to readers, but to create the question, right, and to open up the question. So in this novel, what I do is that the question I ask is that one of the common arguments against death penalty is irreversibility, right? So human beings make mistakes, and where for other kinds of punishment, imprisonment, and so on, you can in some way compensate for a mistake. You can release the person. You can help them get their life back on track. You can pay them compensation. It's never complete, but you can in some way make redress if you made a mistake as the state for a wrong punishment.
Or is it something like a carceral sort of punishment? That
Yeah. But death, you cannot make amends, right? You cannot bring the person back. Now, what if you could, right? So, would we be okay with death penalty if we could, in theory, bring back a person 10, 20, 30 years later if we had made a mistake, right? Or is there something else that is, also wrong with that punishment? So I want to ask the question, right? So, is it okay if we can actually reverse death penalty? Would we then be fine with that? And then the novel, it asks that question, and there are discussions about that.
Yeah, and you play with time as well, with time and memory. And I guess to indicate that you're sort of moving back and forth and you're using multiple points of view, you have used variety of fonts. How happy are you with the production of that? Is it all there as you thought it would be? Because
Well,
I guess fonts are a very important part of this.
Yeah, so there are newspaper articles, which communicate certain events in a different font. There is a very important, as anyone who's worked in the government or in law knows, you always find interesting things in the file notings, to a file. So there are file notings here which reveal important stuff, which are of course in handwriting. Yeah, I think it came out quite well finally with the.
Yes, I think so because it sort of places the text very clearly. Talking about science fiction, we are in the world of AI, and we are talking about a generation that will not read, find it very difficult to read or do not want to read. As a writer, as somebody who lives in the days of AI, how do you look at the changes? Because science fiction is all about the future, futuristic, I would say.
So Roald Dahl has this very depressing and bleak story called The Great Automatic Grammatizator. So where he predicts that at some point, the AI will be able to, using the author's profile and 3 or 4 keywords, write a better story than the author. And so what happens is that all the authors are basically paid off. They're told, we'll pay you a monthly stipend, just never write a word again. And it's quite depressing. I think that's, it's a possibility. But I think what will happen finally is that the AI will write all these novels, which people will buy and read. And then you will have a individual human authored novel as like an artisanal, thing like an artisanal bread or like a boutique bread, which you pay extra because it's like an artisanal bread. You will then have, okay, this is special because an individual human being wrote it, and buy it because of that, and that
will be the USP of the text.
Yeah.
I think, at each time when science and technology comes up with something new, somebody gets replaced. I guess it's a time for teachers and writers to rethink their jobs, perhaps.
Well, I think it'll never be fully replaced. But yeah, like I said, I think it'll be basically, okay, if you want your daily comfort read, if you want a novel which checks all your boxes, all the tropes, here's the AI which will give you the best possible version. If you want to, experiment, if you want to read something human written, which is more flawed, but special because of that, then here's your other option.
What do you think of the Indian science fiction scenario? I ask you this specifically because we have this habit of mixing up myth, history, and science. And for me, when I read about the Pushpaka Vimana in the Ramayana, for me it's part of science fiction, it's part of magical realism. So what do you think of the genre of Indian science fiction?
Yeah, so in our myths, of course, there is always speculation of this kind, and for sure. And I think we, of course, have a very successful genre of mythofiction, right? Amish and all of that. It's very successful, very popular. Indian science fiction, which I think takes science seriously in its dimensions, I think begins with Jayant Narlikar, at least in English. Jayant Narlikar? Yeah. But I think that what you've seen of late, the last 5 years, has been an efflorescence of Indian science fiction. So Samit Basu's near future work, Lavanya Lakshminarayan's near future work, Varun Matthew, climate change, climate fiction. So I think last 5 years you've seen a growth of Indian SF that deals with all these issues: climate change, near future, dystopia.
Alternative histories, probably.
Yeah, all of that. Yeah.
So you do see a bright future for Indian science fiction. They'd probably release themselves from the clutches of Asimov and move forward?
Yeah, I think so. Because if you look at, so around 10 years ago, Chinese science fiction became like a big thing, Cixin Liu's Three-Body Problem, and Folding Beijing, a great short story, won the Nebula Award. And there was this complete, sudden growth of Chinese science fiction. Afrofuturism became a big thing 10 years ago. I think that now Indian science fiction is on the verge of, because I think this year, the last year, we had around 7 Indian science fiction novels, coming out, which is a record. I think it'll grow now, it'll become bigger, and you'll have an audience for it, readers and so on. I think it's on the way up.
Who are your major influences apart from the science fiction writers? And I mean, I'm sure the audience would like to hear you talk about the philosophers who have interested you as well, because a lot of philosophy has gone into this book.
Yeah, so I think as writers, as non-genre writers, like I said, Ismail Kadare, the Albanian writer, who passed away last year actually, won the International Booker Prize a few years ago. He really deals with, just this idea of history, oral epics, myth and poetry coming together to form these national ideas, right? These national narratives. So I think he's a big influence in all that I write. There is in this novel, there is at the end an index that just I talk about these influences on me. So he's a big influence. And then as far as historical events go, the Paris Commune, the Guangzhou Commune in China, these are all historical events that played a big role. I think, majorly those are some of the influences.
So before we take it to the audience, what are your new projects?
So actually, interestingly, I just signed on with a literary agent in the UK 2 weeks ago for this novel. And he said, pitch a second novel 10 years after the events in this novel. So I'm working on that right now, just making an outline.
Okay, then, so we can take a couple of questions from the audience.
There'll be a sequel soon, yeah.
Hello, sir. It was delightful reading the novel. It was exciting to discover all the Easter eggs. And then I got to the end and realized that there were 100 more that I could never have hoped to find. So thank you for giving us a very interesting science fiction. My question is, much of it is very romanticized, probably a undergrad student's vision of what an ideal society should look like. What part of Peruma or what part of the Confederation do you think can be applied to current India, if any?
Oh, that's a hard question. So I think I talk about the commune as this, this space where people are experimenting with non-hierarchical, kinds of living, right? So there is no one government, there is no, one center. Everything is debated and discussed. Everything is voted on, and that creates problems. It creates inefficiencies. It creates, delays, frustrations, and so on. But I think that, again, given how hierarchical our society is, we have to start with trying to imagine a way of living in which we can dispense with those entrenched structures, right? So I think that would be what I would say, that the commune as a way to experiment with society which is non-hierarchical, I think that is what I would say is the major, perhaps what we could try and apply. And in India, we have tried it before, in Ambedkar speaks about it in various, the Buddhist Sanghas, he talks about that. So we have a history of that. We could try and revive a bit of that as well.
Thank you. It was interesting to listen to the name of Ursula Le Guin as one of the influences on you as a writer. What about Ursula Le Guin's kind of, the carrier bag theory of fiction?
Yeah.
How does that impinge on you as a writer? Now, does that in any way come in the way of your profession as a lawyer? It's interesting to know that a lawyer might also be well-read in these kind of, writers who talk about alternatives and different possibilities and so on.
Yeah, so Le Guin is a big influence on me, and I basically have a collection of all her non-fiction, and a lot of that actually is on writing in genre, right? And I think for me, there are two things that I try and take from her work. One is the importance of rhythm in writing. So she has a whole essay where she talks about Tolkien and rhythm in the Lord of the Rings, and just how rhythmic language just completely contributes to the story. I think that's one thing. And secondly, I think it's the importance of avoiding anachronisms in your story. So making sure that if your setting is science fictional, then the language reflects that setting. And so in this case, in this story, for example, it is science fiction, but a somewhat similar world. So how would dialogue work in that somewhat similar world? I think that is something again I've taken from her. So I think her essays are very, very influential. Also I think her exhortation to science fiction writers to imagine alternatives to capitalism, I think, is again something I take, because here in this novel there is a commune that is very self-consciously non-capitalistic. I think that's again an influence from her.
So thank you very much. And I hope that the sentence gets read and discussed a lot. And like you say, all history is a history of roads untaken. So there is a lot of intricate world building that has gone into this narrative. And it's a really intricate read, if I would say. Intertextuality takes you to multiple worlds at the same time. So congratulations on a wonderfully written book. And I hope the people really take it up and read it and discuss it. Thank you very much.
I think there are copies in the bookshop. I think. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.